So we look at the book of Genesis. Good morning, students. I recorded about 15 minutes and my computer went down, so I am not sure if I'm cutting into this a new recording or beginning a new recording completely. So I'll say good morning all over again, and we'll take it from there. If you have any questions, we'll get that on Thursday. But we're looking at the Book of Beginnings, and it's really it's really a strategic book. All the books of the Bible are, but this one is precedent setting. People would say, "How do you read the Bible?" I would suggest beginning with Genesis and going through the whole Bible initially. Just read the whole thing. 66 books in our English Bible, but we'll come to that later. But it's precedent setting. If you interpret Genesis 1 allegorically or as a poem, it'll set the pace for how you interpret the rest of the Bible. So I interpret Genesis literally, that is face value, normal. I call it normal or natural. You can call it natural, a natural approach. A grammatical, historical interpretation is technically what we would say. And not in an allegorical way or as a poem. It is prose, historical narrative is more accurate, I think. So we'll look at the book of Genesis, and really it's the book of beginnings. As I said here in the Hebrew title of each of these books, we will find the initial word of that work to indicate its title. This one is in the beginning. In the beginning. That's one word, Bereshith. One word, in the beginning. And like I said here, the English title is derived from the Greek by way of Latin, but it is originally Hebrew, in the beginning. So it's a book that's extremely important as far as setting precedents for you as a student. The theme of Genesis, I'm assuming you've read it, and that's what you have to do in this course, so you should do it. I hope you do it, because that's one of the requirements. Read the Pentateuch once through. I also said write a one-page analysis of each book. That's 5 pages for these 5 books of Pentateuch, which would be, namely, what do you think the book says in one page? And that can be outline, it can be key words, it can be anything that covers the book for you. I want you to be able to look on your computer years to come, or whatever you have, in whatever device you will have. There might be an implant in your brain, as far as I know. But just be able to call up to your mind what Genesis means, what's this about, what's Exodus about, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, what each of these books are about. I would say the theme of Genesis is really the sovereignty of God. God is sovereign. What do you mean? It's not a dirty word. It's a good theological word, because that's what God is. He's sovereign. He's in control of everything. If you have him not in control, you won't be able to even have eschatology. There'll be no prophecy. So God is sovereign, and I think that is the overriding theme of the book of Genesis. That's my opinion. You might come up with a different theme. And I've seen it by this: God is the creator of all things. Wow. It's assumed. The word, there are different names for God in the Bible, and Elohim and Yahweh are the 2 most prominent names. But Elohim is used here. It's the name of majesty. It's power. Because God created by his word, as Psalm 33:6 reminds us, by his word. That is pure power. It's not, and Asa is one word, but the other word is bara. And Asa really is translated a lot, made, bara, created. And some of those things God created out of no previous existing material, like the material universe. God said, and they were. So that is power. So that demonstrates his sovereignty, He's Elohim, creator of the heavens and the earth. Heavens, plural, and the earth. Some of that was the word is ex nihilo, out of nothing. But some things were created out of previously existing material, like Adam was made out of the dust of the ground. Eve was made out of Adam's side. So that's previously existing material. But some things out of nothing, which is purely supernatural. If you're anti-God, anti-supernatural, then you reject, especially the first 11 chapters of Genesis. And also God's judgment of Adam and Eve at the fall is God's sovereignty. He cast them out of Eden, put a cherubim there to protect and guard the garden. That's sovereignty. God is over man. Man is a supreme being. He's the only creature that it said he is created in the image and likeness of God. That is Adam and Eve, both created in the image of God, which I think has a lot to do with dominance and having authority over God's proxy over the other creations. Dominion is the word used. And then there's God's judgment of the flood. The whole world destroyed. That's a universal global flood. And the 8 survivors of the boat were Noah and his family, and the creatures taken in, 2 of unclean, 7 of clean, all the animals taken in, and then the earth, now different than a previous pre-diluvian world. God's judgment at Babel, Genesis 11. God comes down. That's an anthropomorphic expression. What does that long word mean? It means God uses language to accommodate our understanding. Came down. Of course he was there. God has a hands, but God is a spirit. He really doesn't have physical hands. It talks about his eyes. That's anthropomorphic expressions. That was used on the judgment of Babel. God came down, confounded the languages of the people who said they wanted to make a name for themselves, the sin of pride in Genesis 11. So that demonstrates the sovereignty of God. The nations formed out of that confusion and scattered like God's original command for them to do. To scatter, told to Adam and Eve, fill the earth, not refill, but fill the earth, and the same with the 3 sons of Noah, sent Shem, Ham, and Japheth to spread out and fill the earth, but they disobeyed that command. And then God's actions in the lives of the patriarchs. We could just list a whole lot. God calling, for instance, Abraham out of a pagan land. That's a pluperfect there. Had said to him while he was in the Ur of the Chaldees, which, as Joshua 24:2 reminds us, was they were serving other gods. But God appeared to Abraham there and told him to go to a country he will show him. That's God's sovereignty. And it wasn't because Abraham was better than other people or Israel will be better than other people. It's because God will use this nation to demonstrate who he is, even in the end times. He said to Israel, it's not about you, it's about my name, my great name. He says that in Leviticus and Ezekiel. So God's actions in the lives of the patriarchs, especially Joseph, those coincidences, and I'll do that, those coincidences, those happenings were all in God's control. And that's the way, and by the way, students, we should understand that's how God deals in our lives. And we take comfort in God's sovereignty. So Genesis records the beginning of the material universe. The focus is on the earth, the heavens and the earth. Isn't that something? Heavens and this little dot we call the earth, because that's God's focus. That will be God's focus even in the end times. New heavens, the new earth, but the new city will come down to this place. Jesus came to this place, this little round dot, and died on the cross once for all for our sins. And it records the beginning of the living creatures and vegetation and man and the family unit and sin. By the way, it also records the beginning of the revelation of God's plan of redemption. Genesis 3:15. The woman's seed, out of her, a woman, he will bruise. And by the way, in Genesis 3:15, it's a Hebrew pronoun masculine. It's not it, as the King James interprets it. It's a he. That's definite. And if you look at the other translations, NASB, New English, whatever, it will be he, because that's the word. It's a person, not a system, not the law, but he will bruise Satan's head. That's a promise of a personal Savior coming. Genesis 3:15. That's called the proto-evangelium, if you want a long word. That means the first mention of the gospel is in Genesis 3:15. And then we have the beginning of the nations, Genesis 11. I've already alluded to that. God scattered them as they were supposed to be scattered, and they disobeyed. And there's the beginning of Israel. The focus, 4/5 of the Bible, it is said, is about Israel. So when we get through the first 11 chapters, beginning at about the halfway mark in chapter 11, we have the beginning of the lineage through which Abraham will come, through which the Messiah will come and bless all nations. And so God promised a seed, he promised blessing, a seed and land to that nation. And so the Bible is about Israel. You can't escape it. If you're anti-Semitic, it won't work. But it's not about Israel being better, and we're not better than Israel, but they're not better than us. It's about God sovereignly choosing a nation through which he will bless and demonstrate who he is to the rest of the world. And I've given you a broad outline of Genesis. Pre-patriarchal, before the fathers, beginning with Abraham, the father of the nations he's called. The father of the nation of Israel he's called. The father of Israel. Our father, that's what they said in Romans 4. Your father. Pre-patriarchal, before that means a universal look. It was kind of like a telescopic look, a world history as a backdrop for introducing God's purposes through Israel. So in Genesis 1 through 11:9, we have about 2,000 years, according to Wilkinson and Bowe, in Talk Through the Bible. So you have the flood, you have the fall, the flood, Babel, those judgments. And then the patriarchal takes us to the rest of the book. That is Abraham, his life, Ishmael, through Hagar, then Isaac, the blessed one, his promised son, and Esau, but then Jacob. And then also there's an emphasis on Joseph in the ending of the book of Genesis. I wanted to point out something, though. A little word, Toledoth, is translated, these are the generations. You find that 11 times in the book of Genesis. Now, so it has been viewed as a division marker in the book of Genesis. 11 appearances of Toledoth. And I've given them those. I've listed them down for you in this slide. So you can take a look at those and check them out more closely. And, by the way, let me make a mention. I'm going over a lot of things. I know that. And you're taking notes, but this is to give you a heads up on looking more minutely at these things. Go into these things more in depth. And the more you go into them, the more you'll be benefited. You will be benefited. And I reminded you in our first session, I think, first video, I am for you. I am not for you failing. I want you to get a good grade, the best grade possible. So I want to be available for you to ask questions and to work with you in any way I can as we do this course. Now these videos are made ahead of time, so I'm not in the working of it, which will begin in October 21st. But I want to let you know that I am working with you, and I want you to get the best grade possible. So when we get these details, I am giving broad strokes and have skipped over some of the PowerPoint slides, but I want you to look at the details to get the benefit of the course. You paid for it, so I want you to have the benefit. Now I looked at doctrinal foundations in the book of Genesis, and theology has titles, for different subjects throughout your career. I don't know if you're specializing in theology or biblical studies, but these are the titles for named topics throughout the Bible in systematic theology. So I call them doctrinal trajectories. What do I mean by that? Well, truths that come out of the Pentateuch related to these topics. And we've kind of covered that before, but we have theology proper. That has to do with who God is. Questions about the Trinity. Questions about God's attributes. And of course, we are introduced to God, and it's assumed there is a God in Genesis 1:1. And then we see his attributes, holiness and righteous. He's a God of judgment, but he's a God of mercy and grace. Noah found grace in the eyes of God. So theology proper has to do with the study of God himself. Then there's anthropology, the study of man. Of course, man, God created all things for mankind, for us. We're the focus of his attention, his love, his creation. Even the lesser light and greater light in Genesis, that's for us. I mean, there are a lot more suns out there that are bigger than our sun, but the greater light to us is the sun. The lesser light to us is the moon. There are a lot of moons out there, bigger than ours, smaller than ours, but from our perspective. So God writes from our perspective. So we're the center of his attention. We're created in the image of God. As Genesis 9 says, if you take the life of someone who's created the image of God, your life will be forfeited, because that's how important it is. Then eschatology, what? The study of the end times. And the kingdom of God is very important. There's the kingdom of history in the Old Testament. That is that kingdom through David and so forth, but it ultimately came to an end and fell. But then there's the kingdom of prophecy in the Old Testament. That is that kingdom coming when Jesus will rule. And there are some intimations of the king and his kingdom in Genesis. We'll look at that. Not as much as later on in the prophets, but there is a kingdom to come. Then there's soteriology. What is that? Salvation. The doctrine of salvation. Of course, Genesis 3:15 and the substitutional atonement, vicarious atonement, Leviticus, those 5 offerings, our approach to God through the blood, the brazen altar. It teaches us a lot about how to approach God. So we have lessons about soteriology, and the law that was given in Exodus could never save us. We always failed it. It was given as, and we know in retrospect, it was given as a mirror to look into to see how sinful we are. Then there's angelology with the cherubim, and really even including demonology, Satanology. We have Satan in Genesis 3. All of a sudden, there's the evil one. And Israelology. This is a label that came. Dr. Michael Stallett, my theology professor at BBS, included that in his subjects under theology. Israelology, and Fruchtenbaum, Arnold Fruchtenbaum, has written an excellent book on Israelology, and it's a thick book, but I would recommend it. There are other things like Christology that I'm not listing here. The study of Christ. He's the seed. He's the one that's the subject of Genesis 3:15. Biblical cosmology, how the world began, and the function and purpose of those bodies of heavenly bodies. Hamartiology, the doctrine of sin. So there are other things we add to that. I want to include here, this is Dr. John C. Wickham's 5 Worlds of the Bible. I had him in Grace Theological Seminary years ago, and I mean years ago. Dr. John C. Wickham had this chart, and I thought it might be good to go over it at this time when we look at the broad view of Genesis. 4 changes were made upon the earth in the major catastrophic events. There was a pre-sin earth that was different than a post-sin earth. And what brought that difference was Genesis 3 and the sin of man. Things were changed. Even thorns and thistles and weeds we didn't have before sin entered the world. They have a pre-flood world. Then the flood came. Of course, the water pressure brought about catastrophic fountains from the deep coming up, and then from the top, 40 days, 40 nights. That brought about change that we see today, even fingerprints, I believe, of the flood in today's on today's earth. And that's the earth we live in now. But then the second coming will change the earth. The desert will bloom like a rose, and God will fertilize the desert. There will be changes and a release from that curse of sin when the kingdom is here. And when Jesus comes, there will be a fourth kind of, or a different kind of earth, the fourth kind. And then the heavens, new heavens and the new earth, and no more sea on the earth, so there'll be an eternal state, and it will be on this earth. So there are 5 worlds, actually 5 changes in our world, on our earth, that will occur. That's Wickham's 5 worlds. Now, a brief look at the Creator. As I said before, the sovereignty of God is assumed. Now, I will skip this because we've already covered events and circumstances that will teach the sovereignty of God. Elohim is used for power and might 2,570 times in the Old Testament, 2,310 times of God. And it talks about strength and power. It's a plural ending. Elohim, I am, is the plural ending of a Hebrew word. Like cherubim, it would be many cherubs, but Elohim is a plural ending, but I believe it's plurality of majesty. It's not polytheistic. We know that there's one God, but it's a majestic plurality. So Elohim denotes that power, and we are recipients of the powerful God who has not diminished at all. We're recipients of the benefits of him being so powerful that he created all things and lets them continue, and the laws of creation. We have evening and morning. We have gravity. We have the laws that persist, that keep us alive on this planet, the seasons and so forth, as benefits of who our God is. Now, on the creation account, there are certain assumptions that I want to emphasize. The infallibility of the biblical account. I believe the Bible is the grid for all truth claims, and therefore it is the final authority on the creation. Natural evolution cannot be harmonized with a literal understanding of the biblical account. In other words, you can't believe in theistic evolution and hold to a literal understanding of creation. You can't believe in the Mosaic vision theory that these are visions given to Moses and believe in the literal creation. It's a hermeneutical. What do you mean? That means your system of interpretation, a hermeneutical precedent for the rest of the Bible. And it's an important issue, as these verses that I tell you, that list here, remind you. It's a moral and spiritual. It has moral and spiritual ramifications. That is the creation. And so you can be an evolutionist or a creationist and use scientific data. You cannot prove evolution, and you really cannot prove creation. But I think there's plenty and more evidence for it than evolution. So we want to skip some of these principles for evolutionists that Dr. Wickham has noted in his notes of apologetics. The brain, I wanted to come to that, is a computer. Yokel, a Scientific American in 1979, wrote this. And I will say this, he says this, both are electrical switching systems. Filaments of wire, nerve, fiber connect up switches of cell bodies. Both employ the additional mode of encoding information, but the brain handles analog signals on the same circuits. Microelectronics can pack 1 million, this was years ago, circuits in a cubic feet, whereas the brain has been estimated to pack 1 million circuits per cubic foot. I don't think the computer has arisen to that level yet. Perhaps the most elusive questions surround the brain functions that most make us human. The capacities of memory and learning, transcending what might be called the hardware of the brain, there comes a software capacity that eludes hypothesis. The number that expresses this capacity in digital information bits exceeds the number of elementary, listen to this, particles in the universe. It is the largest number to which any physical meaning can be attached. And that's what Yokel said back in just before 1980. So creation, as Norm Geisler says, the humanist says no creator. We say, yeah, there is a creator, and we're all subject to him. He's sovereign. Humans are not created. The humanist says, yes, we are, and therefore our longing and our responsibility is to our creator. And the humanists would say no God-given values. We say, of course, there are God-given values. And so if you're an atheist, why would you want to be nice? Why would you want to be good? If you're going to be blown to bits by a meteor or some other catastrophe, an atomic bomb, why would you want to be good? We're all leveled. It is our God. It is our creation and being created in his image that gives us that distinction. And to know Christ and to be God's child through a new birth motivates us to serve a God who's alive, who's living, and gives us purpose in life. Thank you for listening. Hope you had a good week. God bless.